Good morning and welcome to Journey Christian Church this morning. We're really glad you could join us on this last day of May. We wanted to wish all those that have a birthday in May a happy birthday. So we're just going to quickly sing happy birthday to all those. So if you're a May baby, stand up, jump around, dance, wiggle your bottom and all that stuff. Here we go. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, May babies. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday. That's something we find very special. We want to do and make those people that have birthdays each month, we want to make them feel special and wish them a birthday this morning. We're going to get going with worship. How great is our God? Well, you can sing along and tell me.
The splendor of the King, clothed in majesty, let all the earth rejoice, all the earth rejoice. He wraps himself in light, and darkness tries to hide, and trembles at his voice, trembles at his voice. How great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God, and all will see how great is our God. Age to age he stands, and time is in his hands, beginning and the end, beginning and the end. He's got everyone, Father, Spirit, Son, the Lion and the Lamb, the Lion and the Lamb. How great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God, and all will see how great is our God.
Name above all names,
Name above all names,
He is worthy of all
worthy
praise.
of all praise, and my heart will sing how great is our God. Name above all names,
He is
worthy of all praise, and my heart will sing how great is our God. How great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God, and all will see how great is our God. Let's sing that again. Here we go. How great Sing with me, how great is our God, and all will see how great is our God.
How great is our God? He is the greatest of all time, from the start to the finish, and wherever that is in between.
Good morning. This weekend we're starting a new series in the book of Job, and I hope that you'll be with us for the next couple of weeks. We're going to study the life of Job, and I believe together we're going to discover when everything in Job's life starts to fall apart. In that moment, he sees God more clearly than he ever has before, and that's my prayer for you and for me, that when everything seems to be falling apart around us, we'll be able to see God more clearly. Now, before we jump into the book of Job, and I sent you an email as an attachment, I believe yesterday or the day before, that gives you a whole study on the book of Job, just a background. So take some time and look at that attachment when you get time, but if you haven't already. But before we jump into this book, I want to tell you about a game called Pocket God, where you get to play God. You control everything. And you can make the sun come closer to the people who are living on an island and burn them up. You can pull the sun away and they freeze. If you want, you can flick them into the water and they get eaten by sharks, or you can shake it and there's an earthquake. The point of the game is you're in control. And I think this game, I'm not condoning this game, but I think it brings up a really good question about God, about the true God. I mean, is God really in control? Does God really care? Because sometimes it feels like, he's out of control. And if he's out of control, what do we do? And maybe he just doesn't care. And in the midst of this pandemic, some of us are asking the question, God, are you really in control? Are you really in control? Because it doesn't feel like it right now. So when we first learn of Job in Job chapter 1, let's get right into it now. He's getting ready to ask some questions, because his life is going to change dramatically. If you've read Job, and I'm praying that you will during this next couple of weeks, I sent you a reading list as well, reading basically 2 chapters every day. Job's living the American dream pre-coronavirus, because his life is comfortable. It's easy. His kids are healthy. His business is booming. And everything's going well. But then it starts to fall apart. A servant comes on the scene and says to Job, "Hey Job, all your sheep and your goats and all your livestock have been killed, along with all of your servants." And in those days, there was no insurance companies. There was no government bailouts or small business loans. So he woke up that morning. Everything was normal. Everything was predictable. He felt like he was in control. But by the time he went to bed, he had lost everything. He's probably thinking, it can't get any worse. And just as he's thinking that, another servant comes and says this, "Job, I don't know how to tell you this, but your sons and your daughters, they were, all of your children were at your oldest son's home, and this great storm came. And when the storm came, the house collapsed, and all of your children in the house have died." He's lost everything. He never could have imagined that this would happen to him. And after he's received this news, look at what he does in Job chapter 1. Job stood up, he tore his robe in grief, then he shaved his head and fell to the ground to worship. He said, "I came naked from my mother's womb, and I will be naked when I leave. The Lord gave me what I had, the Lord has taken it away. Praise be the name of the Lord." In this moment of loss and of grief, he still worships. He acknowledges God's sovereignty, and he puts his faith and trust in God. But things don't get better. He now experiences more pain, more suffering, and people around him, his friends are tearing him down, and God, saying, what did you do wrong? What did you do to make God mad at you? You must have done something to cause this. And you'd think his wife would have been comforting him at this time, but she says to him, why don't you just curse God and die? Why don't you just be done with him? But Job keeps his faith. And also, he begins to ask questions. God, do you really care? Are you here? Well, do you see what's happening? Because it doesn't feel like it right now. I want you to look at this picture of this it's called the pale blue dot. It's from a photograph that was taken February 14th, 1990 by the Voyager 1 that was on the edge of the galaxy about 4 billion miles from Earth. And in this picture, Earth is this dot in the ray of light. You see it? Look carefully. It looks like a speck of dust. And the question is this: are we just a speck of dust on a speck of dust in a Milky Way? That's a speck of dust floating through the universe. Because if that's true, it's easy to think that God doesn't care very much about what's happening on the pale blue dot we call Earth. If that's really all we are, do you think he's concerned that I can't make my next payment, my mortgage payment? Do you think he cares, when everything's happening in my marriage is falling apart at this point because of this pandemic? Do you think he knows the difficult breakup that you went through and the loneliness that you're feeling right now? Or what about your kid's learning disability? Yeah, you're not qualified to be a stay-at-home preschooling parent, but that's where you are right now. That's where you find yourself. Does God care? Does he care? Does he know? What about this pandemic? Does he really care, or are we all alone? So these past few weeks have forced us to acknowledge that we're vulnerable, that we're fragile, and that those are things that we just really don't want to admit, but we know it's true. So Job asked some questions, and we're going to look at these questions because I think these questions are not just for himself. These are questions he's asking for you. God, do you really care about the cancer? God, do you care about the unemployment? Do you care about the child abuse, the rejection? And while you're at it, could you explain this pandemic? In Job 38, God's had enough of these questions from Job, so he speaks to Job. But listen, he doesn't answer Job's questions. He asks Job some questions. And these questions have a way of putting things in perspective. Maybe these questions to Job are good questions for us to wrestle with too. Look at Job chapter 38, verse 2. Who is this that darkens my counsel with words without knowledge? Basically, who is this who pretends to know what they don't know? Who is this who thinks they understand what they possibly can't understand? He says to Job, brace yourself like a man. Reminds me of the English class I took in high school. Gird your loins like a man. I will question you and you will answer me. Job, were you there when I laid the foundation of the earth? Because I don't remember seeing you. Job, did you determine how much water the oceans will hold, or when the sun would rise, or how light travels? Job, do you have the power to move constellations? God asks questions about the details of the universe, and something here becomes very clear when we look at it. God knows what we don't. He understands what we don't understand, what we can't understand. And as we look at the universe, all the details do not indict God as indifferent or uncaring or apathetic or out of control. Instead, they reveal a God who is involved and very much in control. So I want you to imagine a control room in heaven. And in this control room, there are all these gauges, all these controls. They're finely tuned exactly right. because it couldn't have happened by chance. Let's talk about it. Conservatively, it's been estimated that the odds of these dials being set correctly by chance are, listen to this number, 10, write 10, and then write 53 zeros after it. One scientist tried to make sense of this number this way. Listen to this. Picture a bullseye on our planet that is a trillionth of an inch in diameter. That means it's smaller than an atom. Now let's say you get a dart and you throw it randomly. The chances of that dart landing on that bullseye, which is a trillionth of an inch in diameter, are greater than the dials of our universe being set the way they are for life to exist. This is called the teleological argument for the existence of God, which simply says that there's an argument for design. It says that design demands a designer. And just as you would never get in a car or log on to a computer and assume that the car and computer came to be by accident, you would never look at the design of our universe and assume that it's accidental. Or try imagining it this way. Imagine you take your children to Mount Rushmore. There's 4 presidents there that are carved into the mountain. You wouldn't say to your kids, isn't this an incredible coincidence? I mean, what are the odds that 4 faces of 4 presidents have been carved into this mountain? You know? No, you'd immediately say, no, somebody did that, Dad. The universe is infinitely more complex and ordered than a car or a computer or Mount Rushmore. All of this points to a designer, and that means that in moments like these, we have confidence that God is in control. We have confidence that his hand is on the dial. Now, I want us to look at some of these dials individually. I want to talk about it a little bit. Let's first look at this location dial. The location dial has to do with the location of the Earth in context to the sun. Now, if the Earth was just 5% closer to the sun, we'd suffer the same fate as Venus. It would be 900 degrees. If the Earth was 10 to 20 degrees or 10 to 20% further away from the sun, we would suffer the same fate as Mars, and we would all freeze. Now think about the Earth in relation to the sun, not just in distance, but in size. The sun is 1,000,000 times bigger than the Earth. Think about that. In fact, you could fit 1.3 million Earths inside the sun. And you say, oh, well, whatever. Why does this matter? Well, let me tell you why. If the sun were smaller, let's say the size of 90% of all the other stars in our solar system, then the Earth would have to be closer to the sun in order for us to survive. But if we got closer to the sun, the gravitational pull would lock in our planet in place, and half the Earth would be scorched and lifeless, and the other side would be frozen and dead. There are all these fine-tuned dials. Let's talk about another dial, gravity. If that dial were off even slightly, we would cease to exist. Stars would become too big or too small. The moon would become an issue. The moon is precisely the right size and distance from the Earth. If the moon moved closer to the Earth by just a fifth and twice a day, we would have tidal waves 35 to 50 feet high on our planet. Consider the dial called the crust of the Earth. If the crust of the Earth was either thinner or thicker, it would throw off the magnetic field. If the Earth's magnetic field was weaker, our planet would be devastated by radiation. If the magnetic field were stronger, our planet would be devastated by electromagnetic storms. Another dial, atmosphere. The atmosphere dial is the protective blanket around the Earth. made up of nitrogen and oxygen and carbon dioxide. It's so intricate that if those gases were off just a little bit, it would create either a severe greenhouse effect, and we would be bombarded by cosmic radiation, and we all die. Consider another one called rotation. This is very interesting. Our planet rotates on its axis 1,000 miles an hour, and we're orbiting the sun at 70,000 miles an hour. Now, there are times when the sun gets closer to the earth, and at that time, when that happens, the earth starts to spin faster so it won't be drawn too close to the sun. There are times when the earth gets further away from the sun and the earth slows down so we can have seasonal changes. Now, the earth's rotation gets off a straight line by 1/9 of an inch every 18 miles. Listen to this. 1/9 of an inch, I better get it right. 1/9 of an inch every 18 miles. But what's unbelievable, if it's diverted from its axis, if it's diverted from its course, even 1/8 of an inch every 18 miles, that would bring us too close to the sun and we would be incinerated. If it was diverted on its course by 1/10 of an inch every 18 miles, we'd be too far from the sun and we would freeze. There's hundreds of dials like this. I've heard someone try to explain the dials by saying the chances of these dials being set exactly right is about 1 in 10 million. It's unlikely, but it happens. It's like the odds of winning the lottery, 1 in 10 million. But, the truth is somebody wins, right? Somebody wins, I'll give you that. But let's say someone wins the lottery 2 times in a row. Let's say they win, not 2 times in a row, but they win every day for a week. You might start thinking there's something wrong here. I better look into it. But let's say they win the lottery 200 times in a row. You'd say there's more than luck to this. There's something going on. These are the numbers we're talking about when we're talking about the dials of the universe. 53 zeros. 10 to 53 zeros. They reveal a God who is very much in control. The father of science, or rocket science, Dr. Wernher von Braun, came to this conclusion. Let me quote him. He said this: "As I became exposed to the law and order of the universe, I was literally humbled by its unerring perfection. I became convinced that there must be a divine intent behind it all." He goes on to say, "My experience with science led me to God, but must we really light a candle to see the sun?" In other words, what he's saying is, isn't this obvious? David proclaimed this in Psalm 19. "The heaven proclaims the glory of God. The skies display his craftsmanship. Day after day they continue to speak. Night after night they make him known. They speak without a sound or word. Their voice is never heard, yet their message has gone through the earth, and their words to all the world." Just step out at night and look at the sky. God is shouting the message that he is powerful and he is in control. Things might not feel like it. It may feel like we're spinning out of control, just as the earth is tilted 23.5 degrees and spinning 1,000 miles an hour, but God's hand is on the dial. And I think we have the same problem as Job had. It's not whether or not God's in control. We just don't like how he's controlling things. Because if it was up to us, we'd change some things. But here's what we're going to discover over the next couple of weeks. We worship a God much bigger than we are. He sees what we can't. He knows what we don't. And there's something very comforting about worshiping a God that big. And my prayer for us during this strange time is that we realize that we're not in control. My prayer is that we would see God clearly, maybe for the first time, because at the end of Job, after he's gone through all this pain, all this suffering, after he sat and listened to God and asked him all these questions, I want you to look at this verse 5 of chapter 42, Job prays and says, God, my ears had heard of you before all of this. My ears had heard of you before all of this. What's he saying now? But now my eyes have seen you. Something happened to him. His world fell apart and he went from hearing God to seeing God. He went from knowing about God to knowing God. It changed his relationship to God, and that would be my prayer for us. That during the current situations, that we would, situations, we would know God in a way that we never have before. In 1992, the Hubble photograph by the Hubble was taken, and it answered the question, what's at the center of our galaxy? For years, scientists had correctly speculated that the center of our galaxy was this black hole, where the gravitational field is just so strong, so powerful that nothing, including light, can escape it. So Hubble took a picture of the center of our galaxy from 31 million light years away, and I want you to look at the picture that they have at the center of the galaxy. Take a look. Scientist Stephen Conster said this: what you're looking at here are two dust rings circling the nucleus. And when he says that, I have to ask the question, really? Because that's not what I'm seeing. Because to me, it's not a doctored photo. This is it. You can look it up, Google it. Because to me, it looks a lot like a cross. And maybe it's just a coincidence, but the reality is the cross represents a time in history where God seemed most out of control. When Jesus was on the cross, it felt like God had lost control of everything. His son's being nailed to the cross. Before the cross, the disciples believed him, but they couldn't see him. The pain of life when he's on the cross, it fills their eyes with tears. And sometimes we see God most clearly through tear-filled eyes. As the Son of God hung on the cross, there's a very clear message being sent out. He is in control. His hand is on the dial. And I wonder what God's removing in your life right now so you can see him more clearly. I wonder if some of you have experienced loss. Maybe not the same degree as Job, but it sure feels like it right now. Things have fallen apart. You're not sure how we're going to put it back together again. Maybe like Job, you started off worshiping and putting your hope and your confidence in God. But, as time passes, you've begun to ask him questions and you're waiting for him to answer. But I think God has some questions for you and for me, because he wants you to know he knows. He wants you to know he sees. He sees what you can't. He understands what you don't. And that means we can put our trust in him even when things just don't seem to make sense. So if God is all powerful and in control, if his hands are on the dial, then the right thing for us to do is to pray this very simple prayer. Here it is. God, I need you. I can't do this on my own. I'm dependent on you. I need your help. And one of the most spiritual things you can do is humble yourself before God and confess the truth that you need him. So let's do that together right now. Let's close our eyes, bow our heads, and let's pray together. God, thank you that you're at work even when we do not see it or can't feel it. Your hand is on the dial. I pray we would see you, and when we see you together, we would cry out and acknowledge our need for you. We pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen.
feel like you need to be rescued, all you have to do is get on your knees and reach up and say, Jesus, help me. He will rescue you. You are not hidden. There's never been a moment you were forgotten. You are not helpless. Though you have been broken, your innocence stolen, I hear you whisper underneath your breath. I hear your SOS, your SOS. I will send out an army to find you in the middle of the darkest night. It's true, I will rescue you. There's never been a distance that cannot be covered over and over. You're not defenseless. I'll be your shelter, I'll be your armor. I hear you whisper underneath your breath. I hear your SOS, your SOS. I will send out an army to find you in the middle of the darkest night. It's true, I will rescue you. I will never stop marching to reach you in the middle of the hardest fight. It's true, I will rescue you. I hear the whisper underneath your breath. I hear you whisper you have nothing left. I will send out an army to find you in the middle of the darkest night. It's true, I will rescue you. I will never stop marching to reach you in the middle of the hardest fight. It's true, I will rescue you. Oh, I will rescue you. Have a wonderful week in the Lord.